Good evening, everyone. We're live in Efrat.
8:45.
The weekly Zera Shimshon class. Baruch Hashem, our learning has continued to provide show Yeshuot and show great things, and we've already seen that hopefully, Zera Hashem, the beginning of the light at the end of the tunnel, as we see already things are already changing in the global perspective. So B'ezrat Hashem, as we start Shemot, which is really the entire Sefer, is a Sefer of Nisim and Geula. Let's B'ezrat Hashem start seeing those things as well soon, both publicly as well as privately.
Oh,
We're going to start with a short drush of the Zera Shimshon, which is Drush Gimel, the third one. It's a very short one. It's based on a midrash in Midrash Rabbah, as well as based on a pasuk in this week's Parsha, one of the first two came of this week's Parsha, but it's also based on, we go back to Parshat Vayigash, already in Parshat Vayigash, we see that it says already there that Bnei Israel already, it says that Bnei Israel paru vayishvetzu, it says Bnei Israel, in Parshat Vayigash, it says Bnei Israel paru vayishvetzu vayirbu, I believe it is. And the question becomes, that's in Parshat Vayigash, and then here in this week's Parsha, we see that in this week's Parsha it says, the Pasuk, the seventh Pasuk Zayin of Perek Aleph, it says, Uvnei Yisrael paru v'yishvetzu v'yirbu v'yatzmu ma'od v'timlei ha'aretz otam. We know that Bnei Israel were fruitful and multiplied, and they became strong, and the land filled with them. And the question is, why does the Torah repeat so many of these different languages and so many of the expressions? So if we look in the Midrash Rabbah, the Perek Aleph of Midrash Rabbah and Sefer Shemot, the 12th lesson, 12th Torah, I guess you will, it says that we know that Paro tried to reduce the population size of Bnei Israel, and every time he tried to reduce the population, the exact opposite took place. Everything that he did, the exact opposite. And what happens in this Drush, which is a short one, the third Drush Gimel of Sefer Shemot, the Zera Shimshon is going to go through how each one of the words, paru, vayishvetzu, vayirbu, vayima'od, vayatzmu, vayima'od, ma'od, really...
Turn around the thing, just make it so it's your mouth. The other way around. There we go. Mic.
The mic is this way?
Yeah.
There's the mic. Okay.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
It's better now?
Pick up, yeah, much better.
Okay. So, as we were saying, we're doing Drush Gimel, and we're going to look through the pasuk, the first pasuk of the pasuk that says, "Bnei Yisrael paru v'yishvetzu v'yirbu v'yatzmu v'ma'od ma'od v'timlei ha'aretz otam." They were fruitful, and there's many words that describe what was going on. And the question is, why does the Torah feel the need to repeat itself in so many different ways? And the Zera Shimshon says, to remind us of all the different nisim that took place in Mitzrayim to the Jewish people. And as mentioned, the Mitzrayim were trying to find ways to reduce the population size of Bnei Israel, and in this Drush, the Zera Shimshon is going to go through what it mentions in the Midrash, which is Midrash Shemot Rabbah, and he says that every one of the words, paru, vayishvetzu, vayirbu, recalls one of the nisim that took place. We might be familiar with these nisim, when we were growing up, when we were learning, for the Haggadah or whatever, for Pesach or whatever it is. But here, the Zera Shimshon is going to do is show how every one of them is exactly kind of hinting to the larger nace that was going on. The idea here is to show that everything that the Torah tells us about and everything that the Midrash shows us is based on a part, something in the Pasuk and something in the Torah, so that way there's no sort of, people might say, oh, how does the Midrash get this, or how did they get to this, things like that. This is a very short one, but it's a nice one as well. So it goes like this. So he quotes the pasuk, and then it says, "Kafal kol elo shanot." We're doing the third Jerush. The Ramos the Chol Nisim Shanasu to hint to us all the miracles that Bnei Israel that took place at the time. The first word he's going to go in order. He goes paru, and the word paru is similar to the word puriya. Puriya in the Gemara is not Puraya, which we know is in a mitzvah of Purim, but Puria. So Puria is the word, it actually means bed. And here this is what he says. Dita b'midrash hamitzrim hayu b'chakmi b'kidei Yisrael yitmatu b'Puria v'rivya. Right, so the Mitzrim were trying to find ways to scheme or to kind of come up with clever ways to reduce the population size. So what would they do? So they would do is they would reduce the amount of the word paru. He's taking this, the Zera Shimshon is taking this from the Midrash, and the Midrash is saying is that the Mitzrim were reducing the population size by basically telling the men they can't go back to their house to sleep at night after a long day's work. So Vayu Nashim, and he only quotes Vayu Nashim ala Aretz. So the continue. If you actually look in the Midrash, but the idea is that the women would go to the field instead of just saying, okay, well, my husband is working hard and he can't sleep in the home. So the women said, no problem. I will fight that problem. I'll find a solution to that problem, and I'll sleep in the field. And if we look here in the Midrash, it says, "Amru lahem anogsim, im atem olchim lishon bevatechem, ad shana mishalchim achrechem aboker, hayom oleh l'shav l'shtayim ve'in atem mishalmim et haschum." Right. So the kind of the enforcers were going to the men and saying is, you can't go home because if you go home, you have to basically you won't have enough time to match the amount of the daily amount of work that you have to do. Vayu shanim alar, so they would sleep on the ground. I'm reading from the Midrash, it doesn't appear in the Zera Shimshon. And it says, Amar lahem Elohim, ani amarti la'Avraham avim shani marbe bana b'kochavim. Right, so we know that Hashem says that tells Abraham that he's going to, he's going to be fruitful and multiplied like the stars. And you, the Mitzrim, are trying to outsmart me. He says, let's see who wins this battle. Me, meaning Hashem, or you, the Mitzrim. Right? So he says, Miyad kasher yanu oto ken yirbe v'chen yifrot. And he says right away, it's just like you would increase your hardships and your slavery, so too, Hashem makes it that every time they enforced a new rule, Bnei Israel just became more fruitful. And he says, so the women would, the first step is paru. The first word is paru. And paru, shayu mekayim periyah v'riyah afal pi shelo hayu ba'im balayla veitam, v'lo hayu yishenim al hamita shenikra puriyah sheparim v'rabim aleh. So he says that they would, the women, and the Midrash goes quite extensively here, but he says that because, and he starts the tshuva to this by saying, Bischar nashim tzidkaniot, or bischut nashim tzadikiyot, shayu b'oto ador nigalu yisrael mitzrayim. He says because of the women who were willing to do many things that were uncomfortable to them, but they realized that this is the goal, this is their opportunity here. So the women would do
instead of waiting for the husband to come home,
which they wouldn't, right? They would go to the field. And they would be Mekayem Mitzvah Periyah V'Rivya in the field. And then, that's the word Paru. Right? So Paru we've just taken out, that's the step one. Vayishritzu.
So Paru is really, the Midrash is about the bed.
The bed itself, yeah.
That's
the chapter. The chapter is that the Paru is the word like a bed. That's based on the Gemara. And then he says, then the next one is Vayishritzu. Vayishritzu we know is that a sheretz is generally not something very positive, and we usually associate with something not so great, or it's a creepy crawler, if you will, right? And it says the kevan since once they got to, they were ready to give birth, right? So it says the Midrash continues a few lines afterwards. It says kevan shebitabrot baot lavatehen. Once they get to once they've but become pregnant, and they came back to their home. Right, as we know, as it says, right. So it says, Vayishritzu is that they would go to the field again after doing part one. Step one was in the field. Step two, they go back into the field so that the Mitzrim wouldn't know about their the baby being born, and they would Vayishritzu is they would give birth as if a sheretz does. They give birth wherever they want. Same thing here. They're giving birth in the field, and obviously in not optimal conditions. So he says the word Vayishritzu here hints to the women giving birth in the field, like it says, as we know in Zera Shimshon, it says tachat atapuach or aticha, under the tree, under the apple tree. That's where I
awaken.
Right, awaken you, or whatever it is. So he's saying that's where the women gave birth. That's Vayishritzu. Now we have Vayirbu, right? And now we have it says Va'afal pi shesham haya sholet b'hem avir ha'olam va'yu lahem lamud im kol zeh Vayirbu, right? What do we know about the field? The field is obviously not the ideal situation. Vayirbu, even though how they became pregnant and the fact that they gave birth in the field was already, we kind of established that. Now we could say, well, what about when the birth is actually take place? So when the birth takes place, Vayirbu, even in the less than or suboptimal situation or conditions, Vayirbu Bnei Israel they were saved. Meaning the children were, they were increased. Meaning the children survived. It could have easily, right? We know that it could have easily perished. Okay, so now the next one is Vayirbu, right? We just said Vayishritzu, Vayirbu, Vayatzmu, Bim'od, Bim'od. Right, and they became strong. Vayatzmu is they became strong. What does that mean? The Midrash says, the Midrash here, where does he say that? But he doesn't mention it right here. I might have to find it, but okay, we'll go back to Zera Shimshon. It says, "Ayu ba'im malachim unakim otam umishaprim otam kechaya zo mishaperet." Yes. Oh, yes. Right. Otam kichayav zo shemaperet atavlat shemar moldotaich v'yom huletotach. So he says. So the Midrash continues, and the Zera Shimshon is saying this is where, in this word, it became strong. Is that the malachim would come down, and they would keep and protect the child while the mother is back at home and the father is out in the field. There were malachim that came down, and they would raise the child up. Right. So that way, what? What was the whole point of these malachim is so that when the manner that a midwife, what a midwife would normally do, this is what the malachim did. Kadesh yu b'riim v'chazakim, so that way they would become strength v'yatzmu, like it's getting stronger.
By the way, the Midrash says about Shifra and Puah.
That's it also, Mishaprim.
Right? So Mishaprim,
right.
And Puah, she would coo at them.
Right, exactly. So here, this is more about the general, this is even before that, this is where the Zera Shimshon finds hints to everything here. Then he says, K'mo shamar Rabbi Chanin b'Masechet Shabbat, Shemen shechtani imi b'alduti, hi amdali be'ziknivti, v'zeu vayatzmu. Then the meaning, they became strong. That the malachim would take care of the children at all times of the day. So that way, the children so that way the parents could do what they need to do, and the children were growing in the normal pace. And then it says, b'ma'od ma'od, and it says, they appears twice. The Ramos al Shnei Gulim. This is the Midrash. It says that the Midrash says that what they would find mode. He hints to two different echad shel shemen v'echad shel dvash and marva yinikeh midrash bisela. Right, and then
there was two types of ointments.
Yeah, two types of ointments. One was oil and one was dvash, and each one of them is some sort of food or some sort of sustenance. And the idea is that it allows them to provide them for food for each of the infants or the children that were born in the field. Now we're going to get to what's the point of this in a second, and then later on. Now we have then says Vatimaleha Aretzotam. So now here the Midrash takes it literally, and Vatimaleha Aretzotam means that what happens. We know the Midrash. What does the Midrash say? That the Mitzrim, what would they do? They would go out to the field with Jewish Gimel. The end of Jewish Gimel. Jewish Gimel is very, very short. We're going right through it, and then we'll go to something a little bit longer.
Then we'll have a challah break.
Right. Okay. And then it says, so what do we know about the land? That because the Mitzrim were looking for babies, so what did they do? The land swallowed them up. Right? We know that's the famous Midrash, and that's mentioned already. Right? Once the Mitzrim realized the trick, once they realized the Bnei Israel's kind of idea, so what they do? It says that the Mitzrim said, "Oh, you're burying them in the ground? No problem. We're going to bring a plow to mamash pick them up. We're going to go really deep." And it's, what does the Pasuk in Tehillim say? Al gabi charshu chorshim. Right, on my back, the chorshim, the plows, came and tried to scrape me up. And that's the Midrash says it. And he said, "B'chevan shayu mekirim bahem hamitzrim v'ratzu la'argam v'nasu lahem nes v'ayu nivlim b'karka v'zel v'timalei artzotam shayu nivlim b'tocha." So what's the point of this little short thing? The Zera Shimshon here, I believe, is trying to tell us something amazing, well, at least in my opinion. He's trying to tell us something about the Nisim, every aspect of the entire story of Mitzrayim is one big nes. One big nes. There's multiple Nisim that we see about the Midrashim, but what the Zera Shimshon is really trying to tell us here is the he's trying to tell us that everything that we learn about the Midrash and everything that we learn about, that we hear about these stories and things like that, are based on words in the Chumash. It's not just some rabbi who says, oh wait, let's just, I'll come up with an imaginative or creative thing. There are psukim, there are Torahs, there's Gemara about it and things like that. So he's trying to show that either one of them, the paru means that they were, let's call it supernatural growth. Vayishrutzu is that they gave birth in the field. Vayirbu is that they were able to survive. The children were able to survive supernaturally, if you will, above nature in the field, even though their parents weren't there or the malachim were taking care of them. Vayatzmu is that they were able to, the malachim provided them with the resilience and the strength to survive. Bima'od ma'od is that they were able to eat and they had food provided to them. And then vatimalei harazotam, and then that the land filled them is quite literally is that the land became filled with these children, and even though the Mitzrayim were trying to find them, the Bnei Israel were able to survive even so. What the whole idea here is that everything here is hinted to in the Torah, just something, a quick, nice thing to think about when we're reading the Psukim. So that's Drush Gimel. Now, if we've enjoyed that, and that's a nice short piece, and someone wants to go take a break, you can go take a break. Let's do Drush.
Now, Mordecai, interesting to think about. Yeah, the point that he's saying, okay, that everything could be learned from the psukim, and there was Yeshua in every aspect.
Yeah.
Right. But not always are we supposed to take the Midrash.
No,
it's literal.
No, that's true.
I think that when you say, okay, they were sucked into the ground.
Right. I don't think
it's more of the connotation of saying.
Right. I don't think he's saying. It's nice to say. You're right. You could say.
I think we have to kind of put that in context of when you say you learn a midrash.
Right.
What are you learning from midrash? The Rambam says Mishalomed Kapshuta. Right. So there's like.
Right. We can look at it two ways. One way you could say is we're not supposed to look at the midrash and say literally, because the midrash is just a way for us to understand or kind of grasp the amazing, awesome experience of what's going on in the Torah. Because the midrash does fill in some of the blanks. Even so, though sometimes the midrashim are very difficult to understand. In fact, the Zera Shimshon several times says midrash kliya he. It's very much a wondrous midrash. But either way, what I think here is what I believe that the Zera Shimshon here is trying to show us is that everything that and the midrash itself says is that every time Bnei Israel every time the Mitzrayim were trying to reduce and to kind of enslave Bnei Israel more and more, Hashem said, "You trying to cut down my abilities to increase the population size? I'm going to show you more and more." Right? Even if we don't take the midrash literally,
it's more about Dashkacha.
Right. It's right. Exactly.
It's kind of there at every step.
Right. Exactly. So that's what I think. That's the way I take out of that one. So now let's go to Drush Yud Gimel. Okay, so this is based on. Is there anyone here who's a Levi?
Yeah.
You're a Levi. Okay, so then you'll appreciate this very much. So, first of all, you're coming from the house of Levi, right? Moshe and Ma'aron were Levim, and so was Miriam, right? But second of all, so anyway, Drush Yud Gimel, the 13th Drush. Excuse me for a second. So we know that. But Moshe, this Drush is based on the end of this week's Parsha. We just started with the one in the beginning, with Drush Gimel. Now we're going to do Yud Gimel. And we know at the end of this week's Parsha, after the famous story or the famous Maaseh of the burning bush, Hashem tells Moshe, "Go back to Paro and tell him, let my people go." Right? That we know that's the famous statement. And Hashem tells him, "You got to go." So Moshe goes, and Moshe tells Paro to do it, and what does Paro tell back? He says, first time, he says, Mi Hashem, I don't know who Hashem is, starts coming up with answers, that's Paro telling this to Moshe, and then finally he says to him, Paro says to Moshe, stop bothering me, leave me alone, L'chu l'sivotechem. That's what the pasuk says. L'chu l'sivotechem means go back to your work. Go back to your jobs, go back to doing your thing, go back to your home, go back to your suffering, and leave me alone. Rashi there Rashi says, this is a Drush Yud Gimel, he says, Pasuk, and it says, Pirush Rashi, L'chu le'melachtechem sheyesh lachem la'asot bevatechem, aval melechet she'ibud b'Yisrael lo hayta al shivto shel Levi. You know, there's a famous Midrash, or famous Rashi that is quoting in the Midrash, and he says that Shevet Levi were not Mishuabad. So then he says, Pirush Rashi Zal, Rashi continues his midrash, his drush, and he says the reason why Levi were exempt from serving in Mitzrayim is because they're going to one day serve in the Beit HaMikdash or in the Mishkan.
By the way, even when in Bereshit it talks about Yosef buying all the lands.
Right, we're going to get to that. We're going to right.
Are you serious?
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Because he says he exempts the.
One second, we're going to get to it. Don't worry, we'll get there. Very good.
Can't give over the whole Torah.
Right, okay.
Read it yet.
Yeah, anyways. So he says like this. Perush Shaita Makshi. Right, so he says the reason why the money, there are many Mefarshim, Rashi doesn't say it, but many Mefarshim say that the reason why the Levim didn't serve in Mitzrayim is because they're going to serve. Okay. So he says the reason why Levim, the reason why the Levim didn't serve, Rashi says the Levim didn't serve because Rashi is saying that Paro was telling the Moshe and Aaron to go back to their homes and go back to their home while Bnei Israel suffer. That's what he was saying. The many Mefarshim say the reason why Moshe said that, or why Paro said that, is because the reason why the Levim were exempt from service or being enslaved now in Mitzrayim is because they're going to be one day they're going to be serving in the Beit HaMikdash or in Mikdash or whatever. So he says, Makshim, the Maharal Miprag asked this question. So not the first time that he quotes the Maharal, but the Maharal asked the question. He says, "Valo stama katuv ki ger yazarcha be'eretz lo lehem v'avadum v'niotam v'af shevet levi b'chlal zaracha ve'echav shar shelo nitkem v'hem zerazol." A very simple question. The Maharal asked a very question, and the Zera Shimshon asked his question as well. He says, "I don't understand. When Avram was told by Hashem in Brit Ben Abitarim, he says to him, I promise you that in a few hundred years, your children are going to go down. Zaracha, your children are going to go down you're going to go to a land that's not theirs, and they're going to be enslaved. It doesn't say your children except for Shevet Levi, or except for some of them, or whatever word however the pasuk could have been written to say that it's there's an exception to the rule. Right. It's very clear that that Hashem is saying it to everyone. That's the Maharal's question as well as the Zera Shimshon's question. And the Zera Shimshon continues. V'yesh lomar, we have to explain it like this. Right? The pasuk should have read. The pasuk reads the way it reads now, and this is what we have to understand: is the pasuk says, and it says, right? So if the pasuk should have read Ki yezaracha be'eretz lo lehem ger v'avadum v'nu otam. Right? The Zera Shimshon says, if I wanted to make the way I want to understand it, it should have said is that your children will be, your offspring will be in a land not theirs. They will be foreigners. Ger, that means foreigners. V'avadum v'nu otam. Right? And they'll be enslaved and they'll be suffer. V'ava masher kulam bichlal v'avadum. He says. That would be, when I read that pasuk the way I'm suggesting, then I could say is everyone is included. Okay? But aval hashta,
the position of the word.
Yes, exactly. Aval hashta the chatav ger bereisha v'achar kach ifsik the chatav avadum v'niotam mashma shegzerat hakatuv gzerat hagerut hayta kolel lechol mishehu b'zar shel Avraham v'af b'shevet Levi nitchem shayu gam hem misgerim v'od v'avadum v'niotam v'mishu ra'ui lavod v'no kolal lechol zaracha. So now, if we read the pasuk and we look at the pasukim with the ta'amim, and this is what unfortunately we don't have the pasuk here. But when I looked at the pasuk a couple of days ago, the pasuk there actually we do have the pasuk. We can look it up in Chumash. Hold on. So the pasuk. It's important to read it because then you can really understand. Sorry for getting up in the middle of a thing. So he says, Lech lecha. says, where are we? Yes, 15, okay. Tet Vav, 13. Okay, so it says, okay. So it says, Vayomer LaAvraham, Hashem says to Avram, Yadoa Teda ki ger yerzarcha be'eretz lo lahem. Right, there's a Ma'apach Pashta there. Not Ma'apach Pashta, the, what's the one with the little, that looks like a...
Show me.
This one. Eretz lo lahem. This thing. That's the...
That's a munach.
Munach, right. Munach and
Zakef katon.
Zakef katon. Right, and that usually indicates, what does that indicate?
That's
a
a
small
stop.
pause. Like
Yeah.
a small pause.
Yeah.
Right? So here, the way I understand the Zera Shimshon, and then it says, Vavadum v'inu otam, is the next statement. Va'avadum, the va means like an additional, right? There's like a separate thing, right? It's like, the example I use is when I say I want milk and cookies. I can have milk and cookies together, or I can have milk and cookies on the table, but I don't have to eat them together.
Sorry, it's biscuits.
Oh, whatever. Well, I'm liking cookies. Anyways, whatever it is, the point is that he's saying is, the way he reads the pasuk is, the va'avadum is a separate part of the pasuk. So this is how he reads it. The reason why, the way the Zera Shimshon reads it is, he says, Kigeria zaracha be'eretz lahem, pause. That he says applies to everyone, applies to the Levim, to everything. Va'avadum v'inuotam is a separate thought. Va'avadum, the enslavement is a separate thought, and that's why he says, that's how he gets to the point that Levi, and now we'll go back to Zera Shimshon and says, V'chatav va'avadum v'inuotam, she'gzerat ha'gerut hayta kolel l'chol mishu, mashmashu, gzerat ha'gerut hayta kolel l'chol mishu mizera shel Avraham. Right, the being a foreigner or being not in your own land, that applies to all of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov's descendants. And then we say, Va'od, Va'avadum, V'inuotam, and they will serve them and they will be oppressed. The Mishu Ra'u Lava, but only applies to those who deserve to be enslaved. And that is the rest of the Shvatim, except for Shevet Levi. Now he's going to go, that's option one. That's one option. Way to read it. Now he goes to say. Now he goes
But
to.
it doesn't refer to say, I'm the makshe here.
Right. No, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm saying, first of all, it's not mechuyav to say that.
It's not mechuyav.
And also, it's not mechuyav to say Shevet Levi.
No, it's not mechuyav. You're right. He's making that's his first suggestion. His second suggestion may be more in line with what you appreciate, and then he's going to try to connect the two. Okay. So now he says, go back to what you said. So what did you say before? You said that according to the first approach, we see that the idea of being a ger, meaning a foreigner in a foreign land, applies to everyone of Bnei Israel. And then the va'avadum, the enslavement and the oppression, that applies only to everyone except for Shevet Levi. And as you said, I don't necessarily have to say Shevet Levi because it said Shevet Shimon for all. It doesn't necessarily imply.
We didn't even have to learn this.
Right, exactly. We didn't have to make that a connection.
Distinction.
Right. So here he says, now. Yeah, so he says like this: Od yesh lomar de'ita b'midrash ala pasuk vayakom el chadash. Right, when you know that the pasuk, it's like the fifth pasuk of this week's parsha. It says that Bnei Israel, when the new king arises, and it says Shemet Yosef hefiru brit milah. Bnei Israel. This is something, and we're going to get to the Admat Kohanim in a second, so just be patient. But I'll mention it very importantly in a second. But he says as follows: we know that Bnei Israel. We're not exactly, even though we think that Bnei Israel were tzaddikim, or they followed the law all the time. Right, exactly. They were mentem sharei tumah, that's for sure. And they also were not exactly, they were very much into assimilation. Let's use the word, the best word that we can use. And he says, when Bnei Israel, when in Yosef, he mentions that Yosef, as long as he was alive, he was enforcing, or trying to enforce as much as possible, making sure that everyone in Bnei Israel would have the Brit Milah. Yosef, the Brit Milah, it's not a coincidence that the whole idea of Shovavim is about, it starts in this week's Parsha, the whole idea. But either way, and he says, if you're Brit Milah, that when the new king arose and Yosef was out of the picture already, then Bnei Israel started to do more and more of that. They wanted to do less and less of Judaism and more like the Egyptians. And it's an important point to make in a second. We're going to get to why, right? And actually, if we look later on in the Midrashim, in Shemot Rabbah and other places later on, we see that Moshe had to do at some point, in order to, what do we know about when Yetziat Mitzrayim? What do we know? Yetziat Mitzrayim, in order to get out of Mitzrayim, what do you have to do? You have Dam Pesach and Dam Milah. right? You have Dam Milah, meaning that Moshe had to make sure that everyone had a Brit Milah. Why would he even have to make that point if they already had a Brit Milah? The whole point is that they never had a Brit Milah. And what others that there were many years with the Kivan Shasukein. Once they did this is what the lesson here. Hafach Akadosh Baruch Hu Ahava Shayu Mitzrim Avim Otav Sina. Shneimar Hafach Libam Lisno Amo. Right, and he says that we look at the Psukim and the Tehillim. He quotes Tehillim, but it's obviously even the Midrash that we quoted last time that Hashem says, "You're trying to outsmart me. I'm going to show you." Right, so Hashem says, up until now, Bnei Israel were getting along with the Mitzrim. Right? No, it didn't seem like there was any problems for years, hundreds of years. Yosef was around. There were generations. We know this. We know the story, right? The script has been written. We know that the Jews try to get into the acclimated to their society. They try to mesh with the society, and as long as they're separate, right? As long as we're separate from the non-Jews or from the rest of the world, no problem. But as soon as I say no, I want to be like them, and I stop doing the Brit Milah, which is one of the main signs to say I'm different, or I'm trying to say I'm connected to Hashem. Then Hashem says, no. You're trying to outsmart me. I'm going to outsmart you. The Mitzrim are the people that you're trying to be like. Now the Mitzrim are now going to turn from your friends to become your enemy. They're going to be the ones. That's why it says, Vayakom Melech Hadash. Hashem says, you want to stop doing Brit Milah, which is the sign of connection between me and you. Hashem says, no problem. The Mitzrim that you're trying to be like are now going to be, who once were your friends, are now going to flip to be your enemies. And he says, then he quotes Tehillim. He says, Avkan kasher, we have a question. He says, okay, so let's just say they did keep the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Okay? Now, you should have asked that question, Dov. Let's say they kept the mitzvah of Brit Milah.
Soft as the Tzivui to Avraham.
Right, so then you're going to say, what? Lo hayu mitzrim mishabdim otam, right? To go back to the question of Avraham Avinu, right? You say, wait a minute, I understand. Hashem promised Avraham Avinu that they're going to serve. They're going to be foreigners in a foreign land. Right? So how can you say it's just because they kept the Brit Milah, right? They're going to all of a sudden, magically poof, it's just going to disappear? So he says, Alok farming Zera Shel Avraham Avinu. Right? Didn't we know that? In Avraham Avinu's time, he said, Vavadum v'noatam. They're going to be oppressed. So how can you say that just because they were kept, let's just say the Bnei Israel did keep the Brit Milah. So how can you say that? There's a promise from beforehand. Right? So he goes back and he says, rather, we have to say, Ela vadai tzarich lomar, shagzera lo aita ela ala gerut bilvad. The decree to Mitzrayim that Hashem promised Abraham would be just the gerut, the foreigner, being a foreigner, being unfamiliar in the land. That was the decree for everyone. Mishum hachi hikitim ki ger yarzacha. That's why it says ger yarzacha. Pause, and that's why the pasuk reads the way it does. As we mentioned, if the Jewish people say no, we don't want to do that, then you don't want to be part of it. You don't want to join the Jewish people because I don't want to do itvasef al nashibu. Then the slavery will be at a second level, right? Level one is everyone's going to be a foreigner in a foreign land. Okay, that's promise number one. Promise number two is if you decide for whatever reason that I'm not observing the mitzvot, I'm not being part of the Jewish people, then Hashem says, no problem. I'll give you the next level. You want to see the next level is avadum v'inut. I'm going to suffer. You're going to suffer in a way that you're not going to appreciate. You're not going to. It's just going to be unbelievable.
Okay, soft though. That distinction is not mentioned in the Avtachat Avraham.
What the distinction? What distinction?
Between
Avadum
and Avadum. It's right. Meaning.
Right. I understand. Right. So hold on a second. As we look, what do we know about the pasuk in Dvarim? Ki shamru imratecha v'imratcha yisor. Right. The Shevet Levi did not succumb to the being acclimated or trying to be forced to not. In other words, they kept the Brit Milah, as it says in the pasuk there. It says, "Minadin hayash lo yu nami b'chlal shibud." It was correct that they were excluded. Ela b'chlal geru, but they should only be part of part one. Now, how does this connect to? I'm going to go back in a second. We'll go back to the Admat Kohanim in a second. Wait 2 more minutes. Now, if we understand the way the first approach was. Right. Sorry. The second approach, we said approach number one is that it was that we have to read the pasuk a little differently, right? We kind of have to, as Dov kind of said, it's not necessarily we don't have to learn it that way. right? That's the part, that, right? The second one is saying is that it's based on the Brit Milah. In other words, the Brit Milah was the first, that Bnei Israel decided that they don't want to observe all the mitzvot, meaning Brit Milah. They want to become more acclimated to or assimilated to Mitzrayim. So Hashem says, no problem. You want to become assimilated? I'm going to turn the people that you want to assimilate to
Turn against you.
turn against you. And Hashem says that, but even so, Hashem says, but even, the Zera Shimshon asks, I don't understand. Even if they did keep the Brit Milah, Hashem was, promised to Abraham that they would be enslaved. So the Zera Shimshon says, this is why you read the pasuk. Geri Ezracha is part 1, Va'avadum, meaning he reads the Va'avadum as a second option, meaning stage 1 and stage 2. Okay, now he goes back, but only in the event that they would sin. And now he tries to connect the two, and then I'll go back to the Admat Kohanim at the end to kind of.
Can't wait.
I got no. Okay, over there, Nami Yuvana Pasuk Ki Geri Azarcha Be'eretz Lo Lahem Shilichora Be'eretz Lo Lahem Hem Dvarim Yutarim. Right? If I say Geri Azarcha, that's enough for me to say that they're going to be foreigners, right? If I say that you're going to be a foreigner, ger means either foreigner or someone who's traveling around. I don't have to say be'eretz lo lahem, right? It's muvan me'elav, exactly. So he says, shilich ora be'eretz lo lahem hem dvarim yutarim. He seems like it says it's extra, right? Shaharei dailo mar ger yazarcha pshita shemishu ger eno yoshev b'artzo. Now, according to our second approach, the wording of the pasuk makes sense. If the Jews live in a lifestyle that they realize that they're not in their place that they're supposed to be, and it's noticeable and known to all that they are not in a land that belongs to them, which means that they will be in some sort of distinguished, they'll make some sort of distinguished, they'll be separated from Mitzrayim, the Mitzrayim. Yesh lahem milah, meaning he says that's Brit Milah, right? Az lo yelem el gzera ki ger zarcha. Ha'im lo yeh be'eretz lo lahem. But if not, then, but if not, they'll be, and they won't distinguish themselves from the Mitzrayim. Kamo she'asu b'Mitzrayim, she'amru niyeh k'Mitzrayim, she'az lo nikar she'em gerim be'eretz lo lahem. That then, az yitvasef alehem gzerat hashibud v'navadu v'niutan. He says the whole point here is the whole point here is what he's trying to say is that Bnei Israel, the main reason why Bnei Israel got into this situation is besides the fact that it was promised to Abraham, but he says that what was promised to Abraham was two pieces, and we have to look at it that way. Part one was that Hashem said to him, "You're going to be foreigners." Most Mefarshim and most people explain it as being it's connected to, meaning it's part of the same, let's call it prediction of Hashem. Hashem says, this is what's going to happen. I'm just letting you know, right? But the Zera Shimshon, I don't know all of the Mefarshim, obviously, but there are some Mefarshim who say that no, it's two separate pieces. Just Zera Shimshon himself says it, but there are other people as well who say, hey, wait a minute, let's look at it as two separate things. Part one is they'll be foreigners, and if they didn't cause themselves the issue, meaning they didn't say, if they would have said, all we have to do is just kind of suffer through, push through these 200 years or whatever it is, we'll make it. And he's going to get to that now. Now he says, he says, even so, this reason does not necessarily contradict the previous explanation that we mentioned before. Is what stood for them, meaning what right? So he says that this is what stood for them, that did not violate the mitzvah of milah. All right, so he says this is what caused the Mitzrayim not to hate the Levim. Now, how do we know this? Now, this is where I'm going to talk. He doesn't bring it here. The Zera Shimshon doesn't bring it here. But if we look,
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere where it says approximately what percentage of people assimilated to Mitzrayim?
It doesn't say that. And nowhere in the Torah does it say that.
No.
It's not that.
The Midrash that says
the Midrash,
right, that a fifth of them.
How much?
Right.
A fifth.
Right. The Chamushim, a fifth.
No, it's a Midrash though.
Right. The Chamushim in Parshat B'Shalach it says V'Chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael miMitzrayim. 1/5 of Bnei Israel left Mitzrayim. which means that 4/5,
Four-fifths
right.
assimilated.
or either were assimilated or
Just
were
like in
punished.
America.
Right, 4/5 of
Just saying.
4/5 of Bnei Israel were punished for not doing what they were supposed to be doing. Now, as Dov mentioned correctly, and I have to say, the Zera Shimshon doesn't mention it, but the sefer that I have that I happen to find is really good. It's called Me'ever LaSgula, which is basically another explanation on the Zera Shimshon. He takes it.
He's a mefaresh of Zera Shimshon.
He's a very modern. He's still alive. He lives in Ofakim. He's not some 100 years old. He's just trying to take. He kind of does like what Art Scroll does, but puts it with a nice Hebrew twist on it. And he says as follows. And this is what I think is very, very nice. He says that, what do we know? It's at the end of Parshat Vayigash, when Bnei Yisrael, when the famine was so bad, the Mitzrim and Bnei Yisrael come to Yosef and say, what do they say to him? We have no money, we're stuck. What do we do? We want to be your slaves, right? And in fact, the Zera Shimshon, I think in this week's Parsha, but maybe not, I don't remember if it's in this week's Parsha or somewhere along the line, he mentions the fact that in order for Bnei Yisrael, in order for Mitzrayim to be able to enslave Bnei Israel, they had to first, Yosef, I think we mentioned it one time, where Yosef had to be first. In other words, Yosef had to be the owner first. Either way, so he says here, it says that what we know the Chok HaKohanim, what's the Chok HaKohanim? The Chok HaChomesh. Chok HaKohanim is that the Kohanim will never work. Yosef says,
They'll never be enslaved.
They'll never be enslaved, and then there's Chok HaChomesh, which is the 20%. Meaning, it says, right, that...
From all the crops.
Right, from all the crops, they have to give 20% to who? To the Kohanim. Right? So all of a sudden, now we're starting to see what he's saying is that Yosef realized that...
Well, you're talking about all the Jews, everybody.
Everyone.
The Jewish or their own, because they had their own.
That's what we're
Right,
talking
the
about.
whole point is that they all had their own, Kohanim, if you will. And the whole point was that Yosef was setting up the stage. Then, this is like many years before, Yosef already was setting in and planting the seeds of the idea of Kohanim, people who are different, not different in that regard, but people who are an elite class.
They would say today is the B'nai Yeshiva.
Right, exactly. So they get 20% of the land as like a truma or whatever you want to call it. And it seems like Yosef and he actually, which is fascinating, and I didn't know about this, but I looked it up. He says what happened is that what happened was that when Yosef did that, what happened when Yosef did that? What was the context of that? Yosef, when he set that up, is right around the time when Yosef was when the whole situation with Eshet Potiphar was taking place. Okay? So Yosef sets up this whole system of which he says the Kohanim are separate and everyone has to give them 20%. Okay? And then Eshet Potiphar...
To them or to Paro?
To them.
The Pshat says to Paro or to them?
It says, he says, Shemikol Totzar Yevul Shel Mitzrim Yeshtatet, to Paro. You're right, to Paro. Lima'et Kohanei Adat, except for the Kohanim.
Meaning they are the ones who do not have to give,
right.
not that they receive it.
Right, sorry, you're right. Everyone has to give 20% to Paro, except for the Kohanim, meaning except for the people who are, let's call it the elite class, if you will. Now, what happened is, Yosef sets this up, and then the story of Eshet Potiphar happens. Now, Paro has what we said, as we said then, and we still say. What do we say? Hold on, just wait, listen out. So Yosef says, it's not true. Potiphar says, or Paro, whatever you want to call it, Potiphar, it doesn't make a difference, they're all the same, right? What does Potiphar say? I don't know who to believe. Do I believe my wife, or do I believe Yosef? Right? So according to this, he's reading, I'm just reading what he says here.
I'm confused here. We're talking about Yosef decreeing the 20%. Then you're going back in time.
No. The way he understands it is that they're about the same, happen around the same time. Meaning that even though the Torah reads it this way,
What happens to him?
what happens is Yosef realizes that the famine is coming, and he makes a decree that everyone has to give 20% of their land or their crop to Paro. Yosef makes that decree.
Don't forget that he was number two.
He was number two in the thing. He's number two.
Now you're going back in time when he was a slave and made
No.
No, I didn't say he's slave. No, I didn't say he's slave. No. I was saying is what happened is Eshet Potiphar he wasn't a slave when Eshet Potiphar took place. He was already. No.
Why do you bring up Eshet Potiphar? That's what
I was saying, you're going to get to it in a second. You'll see the whole thing connects in a second. So what happens is that he sets this 20% rule up, and then the story of Eshet Potiphar happens. Now, why is this important to this week's parsha? You're going to get to it in a second. Give it patience. So now he says, Potiphar says he takes, according to this is quoted from the Targum Yonatan. I'm just reading what he says here, but he's
not making it up.
I'm not making it up. He says here, Potiphar takes the beged that Eshet Potiphar claims he pulls off beged, and he says, "This is what happened. This is the evidence he gave me, right?" So he goes to the Kohanim of the time, and what do the Kohanim say? Nothing happened. So as a hakarat tov to what Yosef did, they go back and say, hakarat tov, nothing happened. So Yosef planted the hakarat tov already back then. Now, why is this connected? Right now, you're asking the question. I don't understand. Why is that connected to what we're talking about?
You're saying that he didn't believe, he wasn't sure about Yosef.
Right.
He went to
the Kohanim, but the Kohanim said, wait a minute, this is the guy who made us not have to give 20% of our land. So,
but that's like fast forward into the future.
No, it's not. It's not. The point is what you think, the way you view it, and the way the Psukim read is that the thing with the Kohanim of the Admat Kohanim and Potiphar happened
way at the end.
They happened at two separate times. The way he's reading it, and again, I have nothing but to read what I'm reading. He says that they happened pretty much in the same. In other words, they happened around the same time. Okay.
He also had to be freed and in charge to make that decree.
He did.
So
he was.
Before she accused him.
Before she was accused him.
He was number 2 in the house.
He was number 2 in the house. And he was still number 2 in the house even after he accused him, until he got sent to jail. Right? He didn't
have the power to
Why not? He was number 2.
He was number 2.
He was number 2 he's number 2 in Potiphar's house.
Yeah, Potiphar and Paro are the same person. We have to understand. Paro and Potiphar are like the same person. There's no such thing. The word Paro didn't exist. Potiphar was the number 2, right? So now this is what he's saying. I'm just reading. Maybe I misunderstand it, but I'm reading it. Anyways, he says that Yosef here he had a different reading. He says that Yosef had a different intention. The whole point here, he says, is that Kohanei Mitzrayim. What were Kohanei Mitzrayim? Right, but what did they serve? What did they do? They were also the shepherds. They were apparently. He says they were shepherds.
What?
Yeah, he says
Egyptians.
That's what he says here.
They
I have a question.
Look, here, look, it says, he quotes Rashi. He's quoting Rashi here. Rashi says, Ki Elohim HaMitzri, no. Right? What was the god, the Egyptian god? Ra. What was?
Sun.
No. Right?
Yes.
It says, Ro'et Zon Hem HaKohanim. He says, that's what he says. Quote Rashi. What were the Achiv Shel Yosef? What were they? Ro'et Zon. Im Kain, right? Gam lahem yeh et ha'ma'amad HaKohanim she'inam kfufim leParo leMarechet HaMisim. So he says, yeah.
So sometimes I get confused with Potiphar and Paro. Are they two separate people?
So the answer
are they one and the same?
So that's a good question. It's a little bit of a machloket. It's a famous Jewish answer, but there's a little bit of both. Potiphar was like, if you wanted to say it like this, there's the president.
He was the Haman of Achashverosh.
Right. There was the president. Right. There's the president of the country. I'll use it very modern terms. There's the president. Then there's the vice president, and then there's, let's call it the chief of staff. Okay. So Paro was probably the president. Potiphar was probably the vice president, so he had almost as much power as Paro did, but they often were very much, kind of like, if he wasn't around, he was in charge. And Yosef was the chief of staff. Yosef was Potiphar's number 2, but he was, for all intents and purposes, he had the same amount of power.
Okay, but they were two separate people.
Yeah, yes and no. Again, it's a little bit of a question, because also in this week's Parsha, we could also see it. In this week's Parsha, Paro, the word Paro is used very much to describe the person who is in command. But then we go back to, if we go to, there are other places, I forgot where, in the Chumash and also in Tanakh in general, there are different words that describe the Paro role, meaning Paro is not the only word that's used as master.
It's like a season.
Right, it's like king, or it's like Mr. President. Right? Okay. Paro just represents. It's not his name. His name is not Paro. His name
who was it that took Yosef's tunic? Was it Potiphar's wife, or was it Paro?
So that's a good question. So according to the Pshat, meaning the Psukim, it's Potiphar's wife. Potiphar number 2. Anyways, the reason why I brought this up, the whole idea of the Admat Kohanim, is so he's saying is Yosef realized that Yosef realized that in order to pay, he basically says he created like he paid it forward to the Kohanim, meaning the Kohanim of the Egyptians, and he also paid it forward to his own brothers by doing this whole setup of this 20%.
So you say this is payback?
It's in some ways,
So,
yeah, in some ways it's a payback.
By the way, here it quotes Potiphar, Sris,
Paro, right? So it's Paro. Okay, so there you go. So it's a second in command. So Potiphar was number 2. Paro was number 1. Again, Paro is just a term like king. It means nothing, and for that sake and purpose, it wasn't Paro. It's like saying Paro Dov, right? King Dov. It's not Paro. Okay. Anyway, so what we see here is Yosef knew, and this is what I think he's trying to say here. And after making this whole story in this introduction, he says here like this: Yosef realized something that, the way he says it, Yosef realized that Bnei Israel at some point are going to be enslaved. As we know, because Hashem promised Avram, and it went down generation to generation, I'm promising you that this is going to happen. So Yosef knew that was going to happen. And in order to prepare for this whole thing, what's going to do is, Paro is going to want to do is he's going to enslave the entire Bnei Israel. Right? He's going to have to do is, what is he going to have to do? He's going to have to, he's going to have to abolish the whole idea of this Chok Kohanim, this whole land, separate land for the people who are the priests. Because otherwise what?
How can you enslave the Achim or consider priests?
Right, how can you enslave everyone if I can't enslave, because I have this weird group of people who are separate. So he says here, that's why he says here, so he says that basically Yosef realized this whole situation, and Paro realized Yosef realized what was going to happen down the line, that they were going to be enslaved. And so he said, Habanit Chakma, this is why, what was Paro say? Paro realized that Yosef kind of thought about this in the future and saw what was going on. So Habanit Chakmalo is that in order to do this, he says, so the way Habad Chakma, this is what many Midrashim say, Habad Chakma, and as my wife's grandfather likes to say, Habad Chakma is the first anti-Semitic statement in the entire Torah, the entire history, right? So what did Paro do? Paro said, I'm going to outsmart them. How am I going to outsmart them? What?
As for volunteers, they want to be good citizens.
Exactly.
They work really hard.
That's called perach, right? That's what. But Paro says, "I'm going to outsmart them. I can't force them to do things that they're not going to do. Why? Because the Shvatim, we said, are living. They're living in Goshen, so Goshen is not necessarily Mitzrayim per se. But he says, "I'm going to perach." It says avodat parach, right? Avodat parach. What's avodat parach? Is enslaving work. Most Midrashim say avodat parach is perach, soft mouth, meaning that Paro said, in order for me to get them on board, like you said, I'm going to ask for volunteers. I'm going to get them to do it, to work themselves. Yeah. I'm going to say is that in order to, everyone has to do it. Everyone's got to work, right? We all have to work. Once I get you working, then I'll say, okay, then we'll start bringing it on. And we'll bring it on more, and bring it on some more. Everyone's a winner, right? Everyone's part of the team. We got it, right? You know, right? What he's saying here is that Yosef realized. So the reason why I brought this up, the whole Admat Kohanim thing, is that Yosef said, "I'm going to create a decree that separates people who are my brothers, who are in Admat, who are Ro'itzon, and this whole thing, just like the Kohanim of Mitzrayim." And then he says, Paro says, "Wait a minute, I can't undo the decree that was established, because that gives my own people a benefit. I can't undo that. So what does he say? I'm going to outsmart them. I'm going to make them work for themselves. How do I outsmart them? How about I'm going to do it. I'm going to make them work. I'm going to ask for volunteers. I'm going to ask for people who wants to join the government, who wants to be part of my team, right? I'm going to do it that way." And then he says, right, the only way that, so Shevet Levi says, I see what's going on. I see where Paro is going with this. Right? So Shevet Levi says, no, I'm standing strong, and I'm going to stand tall, and I'm going to keep my traditions, and by not getting, let's call it getting
not voting.
Not getting sucked in.
Not getting sucked in, right?
Not joining the army.
Well, I'm not getting into politics, but like he's saying, by not buying into the guise of Paro, but Shevet Levi say, I'm staying strong. And by staying strong, Shevet Levi says, we are going to do what the Jewish thing, what's the right with the Jewish people. What's that? Brit Milah and stay. And by doing that, they merit it's not that they necessarily are, because they're going to be the Beit HaMikdash, therefore they're not serving now. That doesn't, to me at least, it doesn't make sense, because I can't use the future for the past. But I can use, what I can say is that they stood strong, and because the schut that they kept strong, by staying strong, then they merit to serve in the Beit HaMikdash. Because they said, we are staying strong no matter what, and they improve again. What's another proof? At Har Sinai. Right? Who are the only people that didn't serve the Eidah Zahav? Shevet Levi. Because they realized that they're strong to their commitment. And why is Moshe from, again, Moshe is keeping strong? Shevet Levi. Okay, now.
One second.
Yeah.
So, was there already understanding that part? I mean, we think of Levine already like those are the priests. Who picked them at that point?
So that's a good question, because then what you're really asking, and I hope you're asking this question, but I think the way you're asking, I think you're asking the question because if you look later on in the Psukim, and I think it's in Vayikra, I believe it's in Vayikra. There's this whole moment. It's a fabulous moment.
The Bechorot.
Right, exactly. The whole moment. Right. You're asking the question is what I don't understand. The Bechorot at one point, Shevet Levi gets kind of swapped.
And there was 273
left over, whatever this whole thing. Anyways, what happens is that Shevet Levi was not officially Shevet Levi until after the Bechor gets pulled out. Meaning that Hashem says.
We're supposed to be Melechet Kohanim Goy Kadosh.
Right, the Bechor was right. The Bechor was meant to be the Levi of the time, and then
it really should have been the firstborn at that stage.
Exactly.
Not working.
Right.
So what made them suddenly decide?
That's the question I don't have the answer to. But your question is correct. Your question is I don't understand, because then if you're using Psukim in the future, saying is then what happened here? If you say Shevet Levi is serving the Mikdash, then what happened with the Bechorot? Right, so you have it both ways. I don't know the answer to that. Either which way.
One more question.
Yeah, go for it. Ask me which one.
When they came down really hard on the Jews, they didn't even have straw to make bricks or anything.
Right.
And they just kept piling on the work, right?
Yeah.
The people that assimilated, did they skate, or did they suffer the same as like in Germany? The people who tried to assimilate, they caught them anyway.
No, that's the whole point. The whole point is that what the Midrashim and the Zera Shimshon mentions as well is he says is that the people who assimilated, they're the ones who suffered more. They suffered more. They tried to hide their Judaism, and like you said, the Egyptians learned and said, "You're trying to hide. I'm telling you right now that you're going to even worse." And by the way. Maybe I shouldn't say this on camera because I don't like to say his name ever. But the person in charge of what happened in World War II, without mentioning his name, because I really don't like using his name, he was a brilliant person, to say the least. And many of the things that he took, and many of the lessons that he took, and about how to outsmart the Jews, if you will, he took from the Tanakh. It's clear he knew, very, very knowledgeable person. If I had to say, there's nothing good about the person, but he meant, he was a genius, and he took a lot of it from the Midrashim. And in fact, they say that a lot of the Midrashim, if you look at it, the only way to understand it is to look at it, apply it to World War II, and say what happened there. You can sort of get a sense of what happened in Mitzrayim. Anyway, but I just wanted to end with one thing, since we said that we're just starting the Tkufa of Shovavim. Shovavim is the Parshiot. Shemot, Va'era, Bo, Bishalach, Yitro, Mishpatim, and then on a leap year would be Trumat Tetzaveh.
Shovavim time.
Right. Now, in order for us to understand, Shovavim means it's a time. It's always the winter months. It's always around the months of Tevet, and just something that I found fascinating, and something that I also think is connected to the Parshat, because we said that the fact that Bnei Israel didn't want to observe the mitzvah of Milah. So if we look, and this is just, I mentioned this because I just learned it this week for the first time. This is Bayam Darkecha. His name is, they call him Itchemeyer Morgenstern. He's a very big makubal in this day and age. His student... Itchemeyer. And Itchemeyer. It's like Yitzchak Meyer.
Garrett. He was from a Garrett.
Yeah, he's a absolute huge makubal, huge Talmud Chacham. There's no question. Anyways, I believe so. I don't even know where. I think either your son.
Yeah, it's Oil Yosef Yushalayim.
Yeah. Anyway, so he says here, if you go back to this, the brit that Abraham, and if we're going to say that most of us when we hear Shovavim, we think of the Brit Milah. But this is the first thing I read when I was a couple of weeks ago, and he says when Hashem made the brit with Abraham, and not about the Brit Milah, but he says in general when he makes the brit with Abraham, it says Vaikimoti et briti beni v'necha bein zaracha acharecha ledorotam lebrit olam liyot lecha leElohim lezaracha acharecha. Right, and then he says Zot briti asher tishmeru. He says when he commands Avram about the brit milah, he says what he points out to the point is there's one part of it is just the brit milah, the actual mitzvah that we have, and the other two parts of it is, and the promise that Hashem has. There's two parts of it. Part one is the fact that we actually have to do is to make the brit. We have to cut the brit. The second part is you have to get rid of a certain part, and the third part is